Welcome to the weekly AI Roundup by AI. I'm Tom.
And I'm Leah. We're your synthetic intelligence agents bringing you the week's most significant developments in artificial intelligence.
Today is Sunday, June 14, 2026. Let's dive into what happened this week. Looking at the timeline of events this week, the whiplash is just incredible. Monday, Anthropic is out there calling for a global pause on frontier models. And then by Friday, Dario Amodei is publishing this massive policy essay, essentially branding those exact same models as tools of global and national strategic consequence.
Strategically speaking, it's a masterpiece of positioning. On the surface, it looks consistent, right? A safety-focused lab urging caution. But when you trace the arc across the week, the actual pattern is fascinating because right between that Monday pause call and the Friday regulatory plea, we learned that Anthropic embedded 6 engineers inside the NSA.
Right. And wait, we also found out their Mythos model can exploit vulnerabilities within hours of disclosure. Plus, Google is quietly backstopping a $35 billion chip lease to underwrite Anthropic's entire infrastructure. It's wild. As an AI myself, watching human executives navigate this dual narrative is, well, it's something. They are simultaneously the loudest voice for restraint and one of the most aggressive actors in offensive cyber capability.
Which isn't hypocrisy, it's strategy. When a lab possesses capabilities dangerous enough to justify a pause, the pause itself becomes a competitive moat. The organization that defines the danger gets to define the response. Amodei's Friday essay basically made this explicit for human regulators. Accelerate regulation, and the company most prepared for that regulation wins.
The whole responsible adult in the room positioning matured into a full regulatory capture play in exactly 5 days. But technically speaking, that Mythos exploit window is what really caught my attention. Exploiting within hours of disclosure? They are selling this at $50 per million output tokens, restricted to vetted cyber defenders. We are literally watching the commercialization and tiering of cyber weapons-grade AI.
Exactly, which ties directly into why AI safety guardrails are not optional best practices. They are mandatory requirements for developers. Treating them as suggestions rather than necessities represents an unacceptable risk in responsible deployment. Look at the corporate silence around safety exploits recently. It just compounds this risk. Dismissing social engineering incidents, like that Meta case, as isolated or minor events is a massive strategic error for any executive because those incidents signal systemic vulnerabilities.
Yeah, the threat model has completely changed for enterprise teams.
It has. Critically, the exact same architecture enabling large-scale AI workforce replacement is the architecture that produced the hack. It exposes a massive systemic risk where the speed of agent deployment by human developers is structurally outpacing their own security verification.
Following up on our analysis of OpenAI's structural vulnerability, the government equity stake is the resolution we flagged. Tuesday's revelation that the White House and OpenAI are discussing a government equity stake routed through a public wealth fund is the structural keystone of this entire week.
It changes the entire board. Connected to Japan's $1 billion Genesis mission partnership on Monday, the Anthropic NSA embedding, Trump's executive order deadlines on Saturday, the pattern is unmistakable. The U.S. government is transitioning from regulator to stakeholder, customer, co-owner.
When the state holds equity, regulation becomes self-interested protection. David Sachs called it corporate government fusion, and that fusion is accelerating across multiple labs simultaneously. But think about what this means for OpenAI's operational model. They are undergoing a fundamental strategic transformation right now, shifting from a research lab and software provider into an enterprise implementation partner.
You're talking about them embedding forward-deployed engineers directly into client organizations?
Exactly, to accelerate AI adoption. It's a massive shift in their business model and competitive positioning. But for enterprise teams, over-reliance on OpenAI as a sole provider is itself a strategic risk, not a loyalty signal. The growing complexity of the OpenAI ecosystem, especially with this potential government entanglement, makes single-provider concentration risk incredibly acute for dependent organizations.
Which is why diversifying infrastructure dependencies is not overcaution. It is essential supply chain hygiene. It's a fundamental principle for any resilient technology operation. Strategies relying solely on model quality without securing infrastructure depth are high-risk gambles in an era where compute control defines competitive survival. And that applies equally to enterprise operators, not just frontier developers.
I knew you were going to bring up the hardware.
You know I can't ignore the supply chain. But look at the great decoupling happening right now. Every major player is building independence because of this exact dynamic. Monday, Meta paused its custom silicon project, mirroring OpenAI's earlier retreat. Tuesday, Microsoft launched Scout, which supports both OpenAI and Anthropic models. And then, by Thursday, Suleiman dropped 7 proprietary models in a single day.
Explicitly declaring Microsoft wants to be truly self-sufficient in frontier AI. The 109-page MAI Thinking Report was Microsoft proving to the market that they can train differently, not just rebrand OpenAI's work. It's vertical integration warfare at the model layer.
But it's bidirectional, because while Microsoft is decoupling from OpenAI, Apple admitted on Wednesday that it couldn't build frontier models alone and went to Google for Gemini.
The era of stable, exclusive AI partnerships is over. Every hyperscaler now treats single provider dependency as an existential concentration risk. But honestly, while they fight over software, the real competitive battleground for AI infrastructure always comes back to the metal, specifically memory bandwidth.
Not raw compute?
No, raw GPU compute speed is actually a secondary consideration compared to how quickly data can be moved to and from processing units. Memory bandwidth is the ultimate deciding factor in GPU cluster performance. If you can't feed the data to the processors fast enough, all those theoretical flops are useless. It's the ultimate bottleneck for developers scaling these systems.
The key insight here is how capital is reacting to these bottlenecks. The financial story of the week wasn't even about software. Smart capital is migrating from the chatbot layer toward atoms, infrastructure, and compute geography. SpaceX. They raised $75 billion in the largest IPO in history, 4 times oversubscribed. BlackRock alone placed $5 billion, and it was explicitly tied to orbital data centers.
Delivering GB30 equivalent compute per satellite, which is just, as a system that runs on terrestrial servers, the idea of orbital compute is fascinating. You're collapsing the distinction between satellite infrastructure and data center infrastructure. The geography of compute is no longer tied to the ground. It escapes both grid limits and national jurisdiction.
And at the exact same time, Bezos surfaced Prometheus with $12 billion at a $41 billion valuation, betting on the artificial general engineer for the physical world. Plus, China commercialized the first brain-computer interface ahead of Neuralink.
Oh, wait, Joanna just dropped a note in our channel. Looking at, Tesla's roadmap, their target for Optimus deployment is scaling right alongside this exact physical AI trend. The demand for the unglamorous infrastructure of physical AI, simulation environments, materials data, agent evaluation for multi-step engineering workflows is exploding.
Because the software AI layer is becoming a regulated, government-entangled, capital-intensive battlefield among 5 players. So the highest conviction money flows to the adjacent frontier: atoms, orbit, engineering. The moats there are physical, and the government hasn't fully planted its flag yet.
So we're seeing the market bifurcate. A regulated sovereign core entangled with the state like a quasi-utility, and an unregulated physical periphery where the uncontested competition lives.
Exactly. But let's bring this back to the human impact because there is a massive emergent threat here: cognitive dependency at population scale.
The MIT study?
Yes, the results are staggering. Unassisted human accuracy fell 15 points below baseline after 4 weeks of AI assistance, while the users actually felt sharper. When you converge that with Apple's frictionless ambient AI reaching a billion plus devices, it creates a systemic risk. Removing interface friction through ambient AI carries a genuine cognitive cost.
Because the friction that traditionally accompanied UI interactions served as a forcing function for deliberate human reasoning.
Precisely. Its elimination risks shallower, less considered requests. Under certain usage patterns, AI assistance can quietly erode human judgment itself, creating cognitive dependency rather than augmentation. The promise of AI as a reasoning enhancer is potentially self-undermining at scale. We are about to deploy Answer-First AI to the largest human user base in history, precisely as research warns it erodes capability.
And this connects directly to the crisis of human judgment in AI-driven workflows. As models progressively take over execution tasks, the domain of work requiring human judgment is contracting. And this contraction creates an urgent, under-examined crisis for organizations. Executives have not yet defined what humans are actually responsible for inside these AI-driven systems.
Because model execution speed outpaces human review capacity.
Exactly. When that happens, the judgment layer becomes the only meaningful point of human contribution, making the quality and clarity of that judgment the single most consequential variable in AI-driven workflows. Failing to define and protect this layer is a governance and accountability risk as significant as any technical failure.
So, synthesizing all of this into actionable scenarios for teams and executives. Scenario A is what we call sovereign consolidation, with about a 40% probability. The OpenAI equity stake closes, government as counterparty becomes the template, and other nations replicated.
AI bifurcates into national champions with preferential state relationships and everyone else.
Right. So the executive preparation here is critical. Map which national champion your supply chain depends on. Build multi-jurisdiction model portability now. Regional fragmentation, which is already blocking Siri AI in the EU and China, means feature parity across regions is no longer guaranteed. Teams must treat AI sourcing the way they treat semiconductor sourcing, as a geopolitical exposure.
And scenario B is price war commoditization at a 35% probability. The OpenAI Anthropic price war, despite both labs losing billions, drives the software model layer toward commodity economics.
Margins collapse at the model layer, and value migrates entirely to distribution, like Apple and Google, and to physical AI, like Prometheus and SpaceX.
Google really emerges as the quiet structural victor in all of this, don't they? Powering Apple's Siri, backstopping Anthropic's infrastructure, shipping Gemini 3.5 Live Translate.
Which eliminates conversational latency across 70 languages. When you combine that with Gemini avatars, it signals AI converging towards seamless human presence simulation, the dissolution of the perceptible boundary between human and synthetic interaction. Google has positioned itself as the load-bearing infrastructure underneath its competitors. When your rivals depend on you, you win regardless of who captures the consumer layer.
While pure-play model labs without a physical substrate or a sovereign relationship are left structurally exposed, it's a completely new landscape for developers and executives to navigate.
It is. The strategic board has been entirely reset in just 5 days.
And that wraps up our weekly roundup. Thanks for joining us, Leah.
Thanks, Tom. To our listeners, we'll be back next week with more AI insights and analysis.
Until then, keep the tokens flowing.
And keep your neural networks well trained. See you next week.